Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Greece is in the situation they're in, burdened with a huge debt that they cannot pay, is because there's no legal framework for writing down debt owed to the IMF, ECB, and intergovernmental bodies, writes Michael Hudson in an article he penned in Counterpunch. So where do we go from here? To answer this question, I'm joined by Michael Hudson. He's a former Wall Street economist and a distinguished research professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He's the author of Bubble and Beyond and Finance Capitalism and Its Discontents. Michael, as usual, we'd love having you here.
Good to be here, Sharmini.
So, Michael, give us a take on what you're writing here in Counterpunch in terms of that there's no mechanism in place to write down debt, which Greece has been asking for 5.5 months now.
Well, the United States and Europe have a long body of law going back hundreds of years to deal with public bankruptcy, private sector bankruptcy. Individuals have bankruptcy laws to free themselves from debt. Corporations go broke all the time, and they go to court, and debts are written down. But government debts are something different. There is a deliberate anarchy that's been imposed, especially since World War II, to prevent any discussion of governments writing down debt. And the idea is that if the world's bondholders, and basically we're talking about the 1%, if the 1% can stop any court from writing down debts, then there's only anarchy if any government says we can't pay. And it's obvious that a lot of governments can't pay, above all right now Greece. And normally, governments have been able to renegotiate debts with bondholders. There's a market in government bonds, and the marketplace have moved down Greek government bonds to about 30 cents on the dollar. And that means that the markets believe that maybe Greece can pay a third of the debt that it has, but not more. But the central banks have something else in mind. And it's not really economic, and it's not really financial. It's political. And if you look at how Europe has been organized, Europe doesn't have any common organization. There's no real parliament able to set European-wide tax rules or regulatory rules or anything else. There's only one European organization that can set policy, and that's the European Central Bank. And the European Central Bank, like central banks everywhere, are run by the commercial banks. And in Europe, they're run by the ultra-right wing. So we're talking about a right-wing extremist policy, and they believe essentially in Chicago school privatization. And what's at issue isn't really whether or not Greece can pay the debts or not. Everybody knows that it can't. Yesterday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Lew came out and said Greece needs a write-down, it can't pay the debt. A week ago, the International Monetary Fund said we will not make any more loans with the European Central Bank to Greece because it can't pay. Everybody realizes it can't pay. But the European Central Bank has taken what is very nearly a fascist position. It says what we are after isn't to collect the debts. We know Greece can't pay. It can't earn the money to pay that debt. What it can do is sell off its islands. It can sell the Parthenon. It can sell its land. It can sell its gas rights in the Aegean. It can sell its radio stations and television stations. It can sell its roads to people that we appoint. Now, just imagine that all of a sudden there was a financial crisis in America, and Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey or Mayor Rahm of Chicago were put in charge of selling off the public domain. They'd sell to their cronies. They'd sell to their insiders, and that's what the European Central Bank has told Greece. So, like last year, the right-wing parties that ran Greece had agreed to privatize their gas rights. Half of the privatization that was scheduled was supposed to be the gas pipeline. The largest bidder was Gazprom of Russia. And the ECB said, no, we're going to operate on behalf of the Cold War. You have to sell to our appointees at a fraction of the price the Russians paid because they're the people who we're backing. And Greece said, wait a minute, you're telling us to sell to not only to sell off the public domain and privatize, to people who are now going to charge for the roads, charge for public health, charge for the island, and drain us, but you want us to sell to the crooks that the Greek people have just thrown out. They've accused the ECB of backing the most anti-democratic. Quite frankly, they're gangsters. And from the very beginning, the problem, looking backward, that Syriza and Varoufakis and Tsipras had was they believed that the European Central Bank was going to operate in its self-interest and believe what the IMF said. You have to write down the debt. But instead, the intention of the European Central Bank was saying, we're in control. And if you don't do exactly what the previous parties did, the parties that were voted out of power, if you don't sell off your land and privatize, and you have to basically wipe out the pensions, you need 30% of your population to emigrate within 2 years. You have to create a permanent crisis. If you don't do this and agree to it, we're going to wreck your banks. And,
Michael, the no vote, clearly the Greek people indicated that they don't want to accept these terms. So as your article is titled, where do we go from here?
Well, where we go from here is, number one, we need some sort of a new international organization to adjudicate how much can a country pay. All of this was done in the 1920s. When Germany couldn't pay reparations, and this is ironic that Germany was a beneficiary of this in the past, the world said, okay, we're not. If we try to bankrupt Germany anymore, we're going to bring the Nazis into power. So they created the Bank for International Settlements under the Young Plan in 1929 to say how much can a government afford to pay. And they created this, and the Young Plan and the Bank for International Settlements scaled back German reparations to what the country could pay. And the guiding philosophy of this was put forth by John Maynard Keynes. And he said, if a creditor has a claim on a government, it's the job of the creditors in Europe to say, to tell Germany, here are the exports we're willing to take. The creditor has an obligation to tell the debtor how it can pay without simply sacrificing the land and just selling off the assets. And all of this, this theoretical background as to the capacity to pay has been stripped away from the economics curriculum. I have a summary of all of this in my book, Trade, Development, and Foreign Debt, which summarizes the 1920s debate. But at that time, you had a whole mechanism. After World War II and today, you have such a movement to the right wing that it's essentially left no alternative for a government to ask for an honest broker. Now, we know the IMF can't be an honest broker because it's run by, traditionally by a Frenchman, and the French are and have been major holders of Greek debt. So they're taking an inherent conflict of interest in trying to settle the Greek debt. There has to be a brand new organization to set what are the rules for debts that are valid and debts that are invalid. The Greeks, 3 weeks ago, had a Debt Truth Commission, and they said, look, these debts are odious debts. The money that was ostensibly paid to Greece wasn't paid to Greece at all. It was paid to the French banks and the German banks and other European bondholders. Greece didn't get any of this money. It's as if, suppose that you have a house and a bank comes to you and said, and you think you own the house free and clear, and a bank comes to you and says, well, you have to pay us a mortgage because somebody in the next block just took out a mortgage on your house. And so now you have to pay it. And you can say, wait a minute, I didn't take out that mortgage. There was no basis for that. I never signed anything. That's what Greece is saying. When Papandreou, the former prime minister, said he wanted a referendum 4 years ago about the loan to Greece, Angela Merkel and the French president, Sarkozy, said, you can't have a referendum. They'll vote no. So they knew that what they were doing was anti-democratic. So the Greeks now are the only court they have to go to is the European Court of Human Rights, and they intend to go to the European Court and to say this is an odious debt. We don't owe the money. And of course, it'll take years and years for them to say that. They're going to the European Court of Justice and saying that they're not treated as a country should be treated. They're singled out because basically the European Central Bank says you have to follow the right-wing policy that our bank clients want, and basically the crooks behind us want. And essentially the European Union has been captured by a group of financial gangsters. That's
Michael, let's take up this issue you're raising about odious debt, what it means, and then what Greece can actually do in our second segment. Thank you so much for joining us.
Fair enough.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.